Hello, welcome to Pragim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 34 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll learn about what temporary tables are, the types of temporary tables, and the difference between them. So what are temporary tables? Temporary tables are very similar to the permanent tables. Permanent tables get created in the database we specify, and they remain in that database permanently until we delete or drop them. On the other hand, temporary tables get created in the TempDB and are automatically deleted when they are no longer used. In SQL Server, there are two types of temporary tables: local temporary tables and global temporary tables. Now, what are permanent tables? Now, let's say if we are working with the sample database, and when we expand tables folder, all the tables that you see here are permanent tables. And we use create table name command to create these permanent tables. So how do we create temporary tables? Now, to create a temporary table, we use the exact same create table command that we use to create permanent tables, except that if you are creating a local temporary table, you prefix the name of the table with a single hash symbol. So the single hash symbol indicates that this person details is a temporary table. The rest of the syntax is very much similar to how we create a permanent table. Alright, so this create table statement creates this temporary table. These insert statements populate data into that temporary table, and finally we are selecting data from the temporary table. So let's look at an example of that. So create table, let's execute this create statement. So obviously it should create that temporary table. Let's insert some data into that, press F5, and let's select the data from it. So look at this temporary table got created. We are able to insert data into it and retrieve data from that. Fine. Now, how do I check if the local temporary table is created successfully? Now look at this. When we create a table, for example, let's say I'm creating this person details table. Now if I remove that hash symbol from the name, then it is as if I'm creating this permanent table. Okay, and I'm executing this query in the context of the sample database. So when we execute this, the table gets created. Okay, so the table got created. Now if we refresh the sample database here and expand the tables folder, look at this, the person details table is there, and this table stays there until we permanently delete it. Okay, but when I created this hash person details temporary table, where did this table get created? Okay, we know that from the first slide we understood temp tables are created in the TempDB, so we should be looking for local temporary tables in the TempDB database. So we expand system databases and then TempDB and then the temporary tables folder within the TempDB. Refresh the folder and look at this. We see the table that we have just created, the local temporary table. Okay, so that's one way, graphically using the Object Explorer window. The other way is you can actually write this query. If you look at this, there is a query here. We are querying the sysObject system table that's present in the TempDB. So all the database objects that we create, like stored procedures, tables, functions, views, etc., all this will be automatically inserted into sysObjects table. So we are querying that table to find, is there a local temporary table with this name called person details? Okay, so let's execute that query to select the name of the table, that we have created, the temporary table. So when I press F5, look at this, we get that temporary table. And look at the way I'm writing this query. I'm saying select name column from tempdb .sysObjects table, where name I'm using the like keyword. I'm doing a comparison here because when I created this person details table using this create statement, person details is the name of the table, so hash person details. But then look at that, SQL Server has actually appended some random numbers at the end of the table name. And there is a reason behind why SQL Server is doing that, which we understand just in a bit. But always keep in mind, when you are writing a query to retrieve the local table, the local temporary table from the sysObjects system table, then you have to use the like keyword. If you do an exact match using equals, and if you remove the wildcard at the end, look at what's going to happen. It wouldn't return the result because there is no table in sysobjects table with person details alone. You have some random numbers at the end of the name of that temporary table. That's why you will have to use the like keyword. Okay, and that returns the name of the temporary table. So there are two ways to check if the local temporary table is created. One is graphically using the Object Explorer window, but you will have to go into the TempDB database and then expand temporary tables folder. And the other way is to obviously write the query against the sysobjects system table. Okay. Now another very important point to keep in mind: a local temporary table is available only for the connection that has created the table. Okay. Look at this. Now who created this local temporary table? This person details, this query editor window. So this window that you see here, okay, let's call this as first connection window. Now when I click this new query button here on the top, it's as if I'm opening a new connection to the SQL. This is another connection. Okay, so let's call this second connection window. So now if you look at these two windows, this is first connection, this is second connection. Who created this person details temporary table? First connection created it, and it's a local temporary table. How do we know it's a local temporary table? Because it has got single hash symbol in its name. Okay, and if you remember from the slide, a local temporary table is available only for the connection that has created the table. So since connection 1 has created this table, I'm able to access that table. That table is available for connection 1. But second connection, when I try to copy this query and try to execute that in the second connection window, I will not be able to do that. Look at this. I get an error stating invalid object name hash person details. So the second connection is not able to find that hash person details. Why? Because local temporary tables are only available for the connection that has created that local temporary table, which is very important. And a local temporary table is automatically dropped when the connection that has created it is closed. So here connection 1 created the local temporary table, so obviously when this connection is closed, okay, when I close this temporary table will be automatically dropped. Now let me refresh this. I closed the first connection window. Let's refresh the temporary tables folder. Look at this. The table is gone. It's automatically dropped. Okay, so that's another important point to keep in mind. A local temporary table is automatically dropped when the connection that has created it is closed. Okay, now if the user wants to explicitly drop the temporary table, he can also do that at any time using the drop table and local temporary table name. It will automatically drop that. Okay, now another important point to keep in mind is that if you create a temporary table as part of a stored procedure, then that temporary table gets dropped automatically upon the completion of stored procedure execution. So if you look at this example here, we have a stored procedure called sp create local temp table, and what is this procedure doing? It's creating a table called hash person details local temporary table, populating that with some data and selecting data back from that. Okay, so when I execute this table, what's going to happen? Creates this temporary table, populates that, returns the data back to me, and immediately drops the temporary table. So if the temporary table is created inside the stored procedure, it gets dropped automatically upon the completion of the stored procedure execution. So let's look at a practical example of that. So we have here the stored procedure, which is exactly what we have seen in the slide. Let's execute this. So it creates the stored procedure. Now when I execute this stored procedure, so let's say execute and copy the name of the stored procedure. So when I execute the stored procedure, what's going to happen? It's going to create this temporary table, populate that, and then retrieve data from that, and immediately destroy the temporary table called hash person details. So when I execute this, I get the data, but immediately if I just copy that query and then execute that again, look at this. It says invalid object name hash person details. So outside the context of that, upon the completion of execution of that stored procedure, the temporary table which that stored procedure has created is no longer available. It's immediately destroyed upon the completion of execution of that stored procedure. Okay, now It is also possible for different connections to create a local temporary table with the same name. For example, if there are two users, user 1 and user 2, and both create a local temporary table, let's say hash person details, each user will get his own version of hash person details temporary table. Let's look at an example. Okay, let's copy this code once again. Let's copy this. Okay, and let's say this is first connection window, and let's say this is second connection. Now obviously when I execute, let's copy this, and when I execute this, so obviously one person details table is created. So when I refresh this, person details table is created for first connection, and when I go into the second connection, and when I execute this code again, I'm creating another local temporary table for the second connection window, for the second user maybe. And now I refresh this temporary tables. Look at this, I get two person details, hash person details, local temporary tables. But if you look at the end, look at the name, they have got a different random number at the end. Okay, so SQL Server uses these random numbers to differentiate between the temporary tables that it creates for different users. If they accidentally happen to create a temporary table with the same name, a local temporary table with the same name as that of the other user, you still have no problem, because SQL Server appends a random number which is basically used to differentiate between the different tables created by created across different connections. Alright, so global temporary tables. To create a global temporary table basically is very much similar to a local temporary table, except that it has got two pound symbols in its name. Okay, so instead of one prefix, one hash sign, you can actually prefix that with two hash signs. So let's prefix that with two hash signs, and let's give it a name called employee details, for example. Okay, so when I create this table F5, what happens? This employee details table is created as a global temporary table. Why? Because we have two hash symbols in its name. And if you refresh this temporary tables window, look at that, I get hash employee details table, hash employee details. And now when I say select star from that particular table, which is hash employee details, I am able to select that here in the second connection window. And if I do the same thing in the first connection window, I will still be able to do that, because look at this ID name. There's no data, so we don't see any rows there, but still I'm able to access that table. So global temporary tables are prefixed with two pound signs, and they are visible for all the connections. Okay, and these global temporary tables are only destroyed when the last connection referencing the table is closed. Okay, and multiple users across multiple connections, we have just seen that multiple users across multiple connections can have local temporary tables with the same name. Okay, but a global temporary table name has to be unique. And if you inspect the name of the global temporary table in the Object Explorer window, look at this, this hasn't got that random number which local temporary tables has got. Okay, so who created this global temporary table? This global temporary table is created by the second connection window. Now let me try to create the same global temporary table from the first connection, and let's see what's gonna happen. So when we execute this query, look at this, I get an error message saying there is already an object named with hash employee details. So obviously it's not possible to duplicate the names of global temporary tables across different users and different connections, but that's possible with local temporary tables. Okay, and finally, this is one of the common interview questions that is asked: what is the difference between local temporary tables and global temporary tables? And if you have been following along until now, it's very clear. Local temporary tables are prefixed with single pound symbol, whereas global temporary tables are prefixed with two hash symbols. Okay, and SQL Server appends some random numbers at the end of the local temporary table name, whereas this is not done for the global temp tables. Okay, and local temporary tables are only visible to the session of the SQL Server which has created it, whereas global temporary tables are visible across all sessions, all connections, all users. And local temporary tables are automatically dropped when the session that created the temporary table is closed, whereas global temporary tables are destroyed when the last connection that is referencing the global temp table is closed. So these are some of the common differences between local and global temporary tables. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. If you want to receive email alerts when I upload new videos, please subscribe to my channel. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.